We are thrilled to welcome Aaron Royston, managing partner at venBio, to the show today. Thank you once again for joining us.
Yeah, totally happy to.
Yeah, it's amazing to have you, Aaron. Would love to kick things off here. Could you just share a brief personal intro with us?
Yeah, of course. So I am a managing partner at venBio, which is a life science focused venture firm. Been at venBio for about 8 to 9 years since sort of the initiation of our second fund. We're now on our fourth fund. Prior to that, was an investor in another life science focused venture firm called Vivo Capital, based down in Palo Alto. And earlier in my career, I ran clinical research at Mount Sinai Medical Center and worked at Bain Company, focused exclusively on healthcare. My more academic background is a medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania, where I did a joint M.B.A. at Wharton.
So amazing, Aaron. And by the same token, could we also get a quick introduction on venBio as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, we're on our fourth fund, a life science focused firm. Everything we do is pretty much therapeutics investing. And a little bit about the strategies. We have a fairly consolidated portfolio. So our current fund is a $550 million fund. That'll probably go into 11 to 13 investments or so. And so, given that it's so consolidated, we take a very active role in each of these companies. We're almost always leading the deal, joining the board, oftentimes multiple board seats. And so take a very hands-on approach. And so a big part of our strategy is having the bandwidth to really contribute quite a bit of time, effort, and obviously capital into each of our companies. In terms of stage, I would say we're actually pretty flexible and agnostic. About 75% of our investments are Series A. So tend to be earlier. A subset of those are companies we founded, have a number of stories on that front, but we'll also lead later stage rounds. And so for us, we sort of don't like to categorize ourselves as the stage of entry into a company. We think much more about exits and what we're funding a company to achieve. And so for us, if we believe that we can fund a company to achieve what we believe is sort of the definitive clinical proof of concept, and that's typically the value inflection point.
Of course, it makes perfect sense. And I think the hands-on approach of venBio is fascinating, from the earliest stages always up. And I think I'm excited to dive into this exit focused mindset that you and the team have, for how hands-on you all are. But just to start, Aaron, and take things back, I loved the quick introduction on yourself and the background, just your journey starting at Duke, going all the way back into your dual MD, M.B.A. You've really had an interesting journey to venture. And I mean, I think to me, it's been clear that from the beginning, you really had a significant passion for science and innovation on both fronts. Something you didn't even mention that I thought was fascinating. You were also the founder of a tech startup while you were a student, and kind of had this dual approach all the way through your education platforms. And so I just love to kick things off going through your own personal journey to VC. What personally brought you to bio?
Well, yeah, thanks for those comments. So, when I went to Duke originally, a big driver for that was it's heavy sort of focus and sort of credentials within biologic sciences, and so went there kind of with the open mind of wanted to do something within biologic sciences, sort of minored within that or focused within that in evolutionary biology, which is sort of a hobby of mine. I read quite a bit of literature on evolutionary biology. But over the course of Duke, started realizing that medicine could be a really nice fit for me. I pushed it off because my father's an oncologist, my mother was an oncology nurse, so it's like that's the one thing I won't do. And what sort of started pulling me towards it is, I think one of the privileges of medicine, besides some of the patient care, is that it's such a constantly evolving field that just to stay aware of what's happening and almost like stay neutral, you're sprinting on a treadmill to try to keep up with, changes in care practices, new data sets that are being announced, et cetera. And so being involved with such a constantly evolving field is quite exciting as a career.
I think that's a pretty well-rounded approach to the venture ecosystem. Again, I mean, I'm starting to see this common thread within venBio. It's you're all into this, the conviction you have and the focus you have, and it's pretty apparent to see that with your background and how that shaped up, Aaron. And Really, I think it's amazing. Again, some vein that I wanted to point out of this, which I thought was fascinating, was again, you mentioned your entrance into healthcare within the hospital system on the front lines of healthcare. You focused on the back end again, going to Bain Company, and also at the same time, when you were at Vivo Capital as well, just analyzing through high growth companies, a lot of the later stage focus. I was curious as well, because you've seen so many veins and so many eras of when to enter, when to exit in the life sciences community, and even just healthcare more broadly. What brought you to early stage bio? What was your focus to say even deeper? Because I think you've seen all the levels of an entrance.
In terms of my own journey, one thing I urge a lot of folks when I talk to them about entering venture is, I think our generation, I'm including myself, and certainly, like younger generations, sometimes there's a focus on a little bit more of like, not necessarily instant gratification, but they see stories of entrepreneurs start things out of college and do extraordinarily well. Like obviously, like Mark Zuckerberg, sort of like the flagship of my generation. And so they kind of feel like whatever their passion is, they need to do right away. Like, it's like, oh, I got to find my passion to do it right away. Whereas obviously our parents' generation was more like, put your head down, work hard, make a living. And I think sort of the combination of that may be, hey, here's what I want to achieve with my life, and here's my passion. What are the stepping stones to get there, and the skills I need to build to make sure I'm positioned well for that? And if you take a step back and look at like successful operator entrepreneurs, they're usually not very young and they're not very old. It's kind of like their prime years where they're experienced, they still have energy, like they have the bandwidth, all of that. And so for me, I was sort of looking at it like, okay, if I'm going to leave the world of medicine, and particularly in medical residency, which makes me employable for life, even in a nuclear war, if you're a medical doctor, you have a job. What would position me to be able to take risk in my career? And actually, that's why I went to Bain, because in my head, the way I thought about it was, I have a pretty intense scientific medical background now. If I go work at Bain, where I sort of learn business 101, I should be readily employable for a long time. And that allows me to take big risks with different stages in my career. So I went to Bain, had a blast, met some very smart people, learned a lot about pharma decision-making, everything from how to conduct a meeting to how to drive to an answer. And then obviously met a lot of really interesting people in healthcare, but knew probably 6 months in, it wasn't my long-term profession, but tried to soak up as much skills as I could. And from that experience, the opportunity at Vivo came about. Vivo was a tremendous place for me because I worked under some really incredible people that were mentors for me, like kind of cut my teeth in investing. Albert Cha, Chen Yu, worked under those guys. And so it was another great skill building stepping stone for me. And so ultimately, when an opportunity at venBio came up early in the firm's sort of own life, that was definitely a higher risk move for me at that time. Felt ready, comfortable, and was able to take that risk. And so it kind of just gives you a sense that like a lot of it was just making sure that like I positioned myself, for that opportunity.
Of course, I mean, positioning is so much, but I think in the earliest stages of some folks' careers, it's definitely difficult sometimes to think ahead. And I think the foresight that you've had through your career, I think, is fascinating. As hey, I'm going to fill this gap. I have this side, and I want to position myself to be de-risked in a sense when business can be variable. I have a family of physicians as well, so had a similar vein of folks saying, again, nuclear wars, you still have things, but that is pretty fascinating. I mean, as far as different mental models towards stepping stones towards your career for what you want to be eventually, any other advice for folks earlier stage in venture that want to take a similar career path for yourself? Any other words of wisdom that you would kind of pass along just early on?
I mean, this may end up being sort of a common theme in some of our discussion topics, but I would say, in general, building relationships when you don't yet need those relationships or need the opportunity or favor are really important. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, if someone thinks that venture could be a really nice fit and it's sort of geared towards their intellectual sort of motivations, it's good to try to experience the industry and get to know people in the industry over a long duration, because it is sort of a small knit world, and opportunities, it's not like, Bain or a law firm or an investment bank where opportunities come up every year because they have specific concrete positions to fill. It's more like idiosyncratic, it kind of has to be right time, right place. And so you don't want to force it on your clock. You want to, kind of be aware when the right fit at the right place comes about. And so, I would encourage folks to try to get to know investors in venture, maybe help out or even join operating roles where they can interact and get a working relationship with folks so that it's more of like a long-term fit and career goal. I think, folks that are graduating, let's say from business school or even younger that are like, I want to get into venture when I graduate. I don't think it's the best strategy, because what will end up happening naturally is if there's a position available, it's only going to be one or two and you're just taking what's there. And that's not necessarily like the best long-term strategy for entering an industry.
No, I do agree. I think fit is pretty important to it. So it's an important vein for sure. Taking this back to yourself, just one last question on your own background and your own journey to venture, Aaron. Just keeping in mind your finance founder, early VC experience, really this, full stage approach that really just makes you a perfect fit. Why venBio? What was kind of your focus? What led you towards your passion towards joining venBio in particular, as we're just talking about fit and focus?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say two things: the firm structure itself and how the firm operates, and then the investment like sort of philosophy. So on the firm side, just a bit about venBio. What attracted me and what I think has helped us be successful so far is it's a completely flat organization. All of the managing partners, of which I have three others, own the firm equally. Economics is shared equally. Decision making is made equally, and consensus driven. And so what that leads to, besides like that it's equitable from like a compensation and stuff point of view, what it actually leads to is very efficient decision making that's made for the right reasons, because everybody has emotional ownership and real ownership over everything we do. And so what that leads to is not so much like his or her deal from like the Boston office and his or her deal from this office, where even though you're a group, there's a little bit of like self-championing. For us, the way we view it is kind of minimal ego because of the ownership. So every deal is everyone's deal. Every investment we make is the firm's investment. And so it allows us to look at things very objectively, and maybe most importantly, when things don't go well, viewing it like very objectively and what are the decision-making points from that. And that also prevents, good money from coming after bad and subsequent financings, just a lot of the tripping points that we see in the industry. So I think that model is unique. We're single office, very small team, small office. And so everything is efficient. There's not a lot of BS. And so that attracted me, not only just like the upside, but the way that firm was run. And I think that's relatively rare. On the investment hypothesis side, so, one thing I think we do quite well is, I mentioned earlier, we're exit driven. So we're very focused on the exit, and then we back away from that. Like, is this a good stage to invest in this company to get to that exit? Is there a venture like return, et cetera? And so because we're exit driven, I feel like we de-risk sort of our outcomes in good or bad economies, because we've thought a lot about that. And it brings me back to something I learned back at business school, which is like a fundamental principle of it's make what you can sell, don't sell what you can make. And so you have to think, first of all, like, is there a need for this? Do physicians want this? Does pharma want this, et cetera? And then they do, okay, let's go make it. What you see a lot of, and I think is again, a tripping point in venture across industries, is this is really cool. Let's go develop it and let's see if we can market it. And there's no worse feeling in this industry than spending time, money, and taking a lot of risk only to generate data that no one cares about. Because then you're like, wow, there was never a good outcome here. Like, we did it all and it still didn't work. And so what I think venBio does really well and attracted me in the early phases is we go to pharma, we have substantial relationships with pharma, we talk to a lot of doctors, we talk to a lot of academic researchers about would this be important if we could generate it, and really understanding that, and then going and finding a company, building a company, investing in a company to get that for them. And I think, it's a little bit different than some of the prior experiences I've had investing, and I think it's sustainable.
I can see the sustainability in it, and the focus again just ties back into venBio and just what keeps you all so special as a team. And I think fund structure as well is just fantastic putting that together. But I'm just still infinitely curious. I just want to get this out in front. Just venBio is investing in companies just in various stages. I mean, like you said, early stage to late stage, from academic startups to spin outs, and just leading most of your investments and having that deep focus within each one. We've touched on this in particular in your previous answer, but I'd really just love to dive deep in this time. Just how does venBio in particular just really differentiate yourself within the market, within the focus, because you all have so much breadth with what you do. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that because we have a consolidated portfolio and we're not, so let's say, we're doing 11 to 13 investments over 3 years or so. You could you back calculate, like that's 3 to 5 investments max per year. Because of that, we sort of don't need a wide aperture in what we look at. We also don't need like endless amounts of opportunity and to invest where we're just doing 20 a year. And so I guess what I'm sort of getting at in a long-winded way is, for us, a lot of our best deal flow now and opportunities come from operators that we've worked with in the past, other life science investors we've worked with in the past, board members, board chairs we worked with in the past, that actually know intimately how we add value to a company, and maybe most importantly, the amount of time we're able to put into companies, because we have such a consolidated portfolio. And so I think for us, that value add, besides money, ends up being a big draw for operators to work with us again. It's a very important thing in sort of today's biotech investing world, because there's a lot of capital sort of sloshing around the ecosystem. Chinese capital that's come to the US looking for American deals, hedge funds that have raised earlier stage vehicles that are kind of in a more passive role. And so if you're a tremendous operator with a tremendous team, tremendous drug, and a clinical trial strategy that's set, you probably don't need venBio's money, because if you just need capital, there's a lot out there that's going to be more flexible with terms than us, just because their return thresholds are different, their time horizons are different. So who ends up coming through our door, knowing that they're not maximizing valuation to the brim, is folks that just say, we want value-added investors, either because we have a need now to build out this company, or we believe that their involvement will lead to a lot of value being attributed to the company over time, just because we are very selective. And so I think like our reputation, and it's a small world, of course, it's easy to sort of reference one another. Our reputation of just being extremely hands-on and value additive has helped us a lot. And I think that that's been a differentiator. In the ways that we actually do add value, I would say, if we take a step back, when we make an investment, kind of the first 6 to 12 months maybe is pretty heavy involvement. And then our goal is, once the team is in place, and when I say team, I mean broader management teams in place, and the clinical trial or clin dev strategies in place, we can be way lighter touch, because it's not our job with a good management team to be involved. And then as the company turns the corner of after data towards thinking about exit, IPO, or M&A, we can be quite additive there, particularly on the M&A side, where we're deeply sort of like networked in pharma, and those relationships are texting relationships for us. Or obviously on the IPO side, depending on the sophistication of the management team, we have, like many other firms, very strong banker relationships and public investor relationships. I think those stories and reference checks on us and how we add value is just very helpful for companies that need a lot of building around them.
Of course. And, founders always need great support. It's amazing to see venBio's very hands-on approach and just hyper sector focus in a way within therapeutics and even deeper. And just out of curiosity, with your just hyper focus within therapeutics and your deep dive there, just building on the differentiators as venBio is a fund in that focus. Could you describe what you look for within your diligence process? I think with so much capital coming in therapeutics, before we even get to the value add and company fund support, how do you and the team really just separate signal and noise when evaluating company creation, especially for how much you all do at just the early foundational stage?
Absolutely. So, well, first of all, it's hard, right? And I think what's really paramount, at least for us, is that we have internal theses that we've put together, primarily driven by intense and consistent conversations with pharma. As I mentioned, physicians, and then a lot of academic researchers from the institutions we trained at, as well as others, to understand internally, what we think are key therapeutic areas, key new targets that pharma is going to, start focusing on, and start developing theses around those. Like, this is our best approach to that target. Here's what we would look for, and here's a type of investment we'd want to make in the next 12 months. I think why that's so important is, as you can imagine, every pitch we get, what's challenging about the profession in general is it's typically a world expert in an area pitching us their science and the clinical need. And obviously, like, based on pattern recognition, and as you get more experienced as an investor, there's a lot that you can you trust, sometimes you distrust, you develop certain intuitive reactions to things, but overall it's very smart people that are very credentialed that really know their stuff. And so if you don't have an internal thesis, you just kind of get pulled opportunistically left and right. Like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Wow. Oh, wow, that this is fascinating. Maybe we should do a deep dive here. And so we do a lot of landscaping of therapeutic areas and prioritization of what we want to do, and then scour those companies, technologies, and licensing opportunities. And so it's very rare for us, obviously you can never say never, but it's rare for us to get pitched a company that we've kind of never heard of, or like a new target we haven't heard of. It knocks our socks off. We do diligence and invest. In 90% of our companies, we've either followed the specific company for multiple years or that space for quite a long duration, and we've met with everyone developing something in that space. And that gives us a lot more confidence of how to react to pitches, and so sort of like the signal and noise for what we're looking for.
I completely agree on the thematic approach and just being very thesis driven. Just while we're on the subject, do you have any recommendations for founders reaching out to venBio, just more curious about your subject, your focus, your progress, when to join in, when to reach out to y'all?
Yeah, and I guess it literally goes back to the theme I was saying before, which is, try to build relationships that aren't transactional, i.e. like when something is needed. And it's interesting, right? Like American business in general, it's like kind of one of our faults where we do things on a very transactional nature. Whereas like if you go to Asia, the term guanxi is like you cultivate this relationship before you do business. It's much more interpersonal. And so I think what's important is, like, let's say you're a founder and you don't know a venture firm yet. Kind of going back to, like, we rarely invest in something we just heard about. It's kind of rare that you'll pitch something that's so exciting that you'll just get a bunch of money without the relationship in hand. Different, because there's a lot of seed stage firms that do small checks. Within biotech, you tend to get bulkier checks from firms like ourselves. And so you kind of want to start the relationship early. And I always appreciate it when founders reach out and say, hey, here's what we're working on. Is this a fit now? Otherwise, would just love to know when it would be. And then I may say something like, oh, when you have a candidate selected and some of your initial in vivo, mouse data would be a good time to reassess. And they'll say, okay, you know what? We're going to go generate that in 9 months. You'll hear from me in 9 to 12 months. And then when they reach back out, not only is it the right time, but they've executed on the plan that they prospectively said they would. You got a conversation before where you've already started building a relationship. And so I would just say, reach out before there's an acute capital need.
Of course, I think it's fantastic advice to just fundraising in general in the start there. And just as we're on the process, we're talking about approach to companies and even thesis to the question prior to that. Would love to just take a moment to dive into portfolio overview and, just you've continued your track record through your career, just investment at venBio with just companies within therapeutics, but Apellis Pharmaceuticals, Menlo Therapeutics, Akero, just so many among others. Just as an investor spanning such a lengthy investment cycle, could you share a little bit more about how you develop those investment theses? I know you mentioned taking out landscapes on those broad therapeutic, landscape approaches, just deep dives rather than kind of being signal approach. This is cool. Yeah. Any other approaches just within the team internally, just how the fund structures their own thesis development?
Yeah, I'd say one of our principles is we like to take a lot of forms of risk. certainly team building risk, execution risk, clinical trial risk is something we embrace and we take a lot of time to help companies with, of designing the right study to show that a drug works. The type of risk we don't really like to take is like heavy biologic risk, because obviously we can't control it. It's a fact in nature and it's binary. And so before we invest, we really like to know that like the biology, or at least we have a high degree of confidence and certainty that the biology is going to work. And so we gravitate a lot towards new modalities to existing biological targets. And I can give some examples, or new approaches, new molecules to existing biological targets that we think would become best in class and have a huge upside. So like a couple examples that kind of illustrate, kind of the types of things we do. So one of our companies that's a private now, we hope has an exciting year ahead, is a company called RayzeBio. It's a radiopharmaceutical company. And so what's exciting about this is, at a high level, the two treatments that have worked in cancer for 50 years as blunt instruments are chemotherapy and radiation. As we know, the world of chemotherapies changed quite a bit with ADCs, or antibody drug conjugates, where you're taking chemotherapy onto a binder that we know works and gets to a tumor, like a monoclonal antibody, and you bring chemo right to the tumor. And there's been really nice efficacy that's been published, huge acquisitions in the space, and it's an elegant way to do targeted chemotherapy delivery. So in a similar vein to that, RayzeBio was one of the first biotech companies doing what we would do like targeted radiopharmaceuticals, where very similarly, you take a binder that we know works and gets to a tumor, and you attach a radioisotope to it. So it's almost like this like mini nuclear bomb that goes right to the tumor. As you can imagine, there's a lot of complications with attaching a radioisotope, how you even get it to the sort of patient, how it's administered, because this is active radiation. But fundamentally, what do we know? We know the binder gets to the tumor, and we know radiation works in certain cancers. And so you've de-risked a lot of the biology. And so what the risk we took was building a great team, building the infrastructure to do this, picking the right tumor, and doing the right clinical studies. But biologically, what I do know is you get this to the tumor will shrink. And so that's a bread and butter, like venBio company built, where what it's not is, hey, we're building a company that's going after brand new oncology targets, which if they work, can change cancer. If they don't work, we're kind of screwed. And so in a similar vein to that, another one of our companies that's been recently successful as an IPO in 2021 and had a nice run is a company we founded called Ventyx. And Ventyx, they have a couple molecules, but their lead molecule is a TYK2 inhibitor, a small molecule that has a lot of application in autoimmune disease. Well, BMS well-validated this target with a drug that's now approved called Sotyktu. It worked wonderfully as an oral therapy in psoriasis and potentially other diseases, almost on par with injected monoclonal antibodies. But they ran into dosing issues because an off-target effect of their molecule caused things like acne and other issues. So what we did is, knowing that the biology was de-risked on the efficacy side, we're able to help put a company together with a great CEO, Raju, who had a molecule that hit TYK2 but did not have some of these off-target receptor inhibition. And so the thesis was, we can dose this much higher without running into dose-limiting tox, and drive much more efficacy, even closer to like the max biologic efficacy. And that's sort of borne out so far in the clinic. And so again, a company build, really exciting upside, but again, we know TYK2 works. And so we're not just rolling the dice on a new target.
Yeah, again, I completely see the approach that you and the team have on that focus as well. It's honestly, it's a fascinating approach with this, but I think about this in general as well, just given everything happening in the markets at this time. Just venBio's ability to invest in companies across multiple stages just must provide an incredibly intersectional perspective, to be honest. I mean, could you just share more about your thoughts about this moment in biotech? I think you all have a lot of different stages to think and focus on. Are there broader, more just intersectional thoughts that you would have on the space in general to begin with?
Yeah, so I would say we're very comfortable in this type of environment because, kind of as I've been describing, we're very focused on funding a company to clinical data, regardless of what the series A, B, C you call it. And so inherently that means we're pretty product focused. Like if it's an early stage platform, like CRISPR 2.0, clearly we're not going to be able to fund that to clinical proof of concept definitively in any reasonable time period. And so we tend to be fairly product focused, or if it's a platform, at least we could drive clinical data with the lead. And so that helps certainly in a time like now, where people think a lot about the time value of money and sort of a risk-adjusted return when interest rates are this high and there's some capital restriction. And so what I would say on that topic is for operators and founders in this time of biotech, I think there's a heightened sensitivity from everyone now on sort of that similar strategy of when can you drive data? Because I don't want to fund to incremental sort of value addition and expect that another round of financing will just come at a big step up. I can't rely on that. It's too much of a turbulent market. So what is the timeline to clinical data, and can you get there? Because at the end of the day, as clinical data is still driving huge outcomes in biotech, even in this turbulent market, and that means up is up and down is down. Like there's like real rules to this ecosystem still, thank God, that everything's abiding by. It's not like, no one can make money and everything's down, down, down. And so folks should just be really conscientious about the key milestones that they can get to on a funding and really lay those out and a funding that's geared towards those. Otherwise, I think it's very tricky to get funded without driving to what, folks think is a definitive value inflection point.
Certainly. And I think from a fundraising roadmap and track record perspective, that makes perfect sense. On your own vein and journey, as just venBio is just such a team-focused fund and just portfolio support to the nines, right? Mm-hmm. Just from your own personal perspective, your own personal journey, Aaron, I'd just be curious, what does just being a good partner to your portfolio companies mean to you, especially at this time when markets are a little tougher, when just support matters more than anything, just from your own personal thoughts, thesis, mantras?
Early on, a big part of our sort of time goes into operators and management teams, helping them with our network recruit. And when it gets to clinical trial strategy, making sure that they understand the data they need to generate to catalyze value. And that's an informed opinion from us, again, from a lot of pharma conversations, a lot of physician conversations that they may have not had yet.
Right. And I think when you bring in the ideal and then just the focus within board and governance, I always think it's fascinating. I just diving deeper into that aspect of portfolio support. I mean, sitting on the board of a company is a responsibility many are just familiar with broadly, but I think may not know much about within a focus. I mean, I think within your focus, right, when you talk about how venBio is amazing at the help at the earlier stage versus later stage when clinical data is out, you're looking towards public companies and exits. Can you share what it's like for you serving on the boards of early stage startups, potentially even just how does this role differ when you're serving on the board of later stage companies, whether it's advice, focus, just other things and just takes from your own experience personally?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's hard to overgeneralize, but typically early on, I would say operators would say we're the most helpful because there's so many requirements to get a company off the ground and kind of rolling, whether it's build out the team, find lab space, have a back end to the company, maybe start with some initial pharma partnerships that bring in non-dilutive capital, all of that. There's just a lot that we can help with because we've just done it many times. We have a broad network across many companies, whereas a specific operator may have only a more limited network of who they've worked with. As a company gets its strategy set, we're a lot less additive because, again, our job is not to run these companies. Our job is to find someone and a team to really run them well. And so let's say you pick a development candidate and now you have a path towards IND and a phase 1 trial design. We shouldn't be as involved unless key hiccups come up, like there's an impurity in CMC, and we can say either we've seen this before in one of our other companies, here's how they addressed it, or we're going to go find out via our broad network of companies what other CMC heads would think about this. But if there's no curveball or issue, we really should step back. And that's not laziness. It's just like, hey, we're not here to run the company. Again, when it kind of comes to subsequent financings or M&A, I think we could be particularly helpful, again, either in relationships or just having seen hundreds of financings, tens, dozens of pharma BD deals, just a lot of input of here's a term that we've gotten a lot before in BD deals. Here's a term we've never been able to get. Don't push there. We can help there. But then as a company evolves and becomes, let's say, a public company, it's usually pretty rare that we can be immensely additive versus operators that have either ran public companies, been on boards of multiple public companies, because that's when a CEO can really surround themselves with the infrastructure they need to commercialize a drug. And so I think there's a natural evolution of a board that makes a lot of sense.
And I think just having that clarity and that focus from the start is fantastic. I love that you, Aaron, and just venBio have that clarity and where your expertise lies and where it is. And so maybe let's focus on the earlier stage side. And just for a minute, just thinking about this, because you all are such a team focused fund, building this up and making sure company formation is solid. I mean, as we just think about the lengthy life cycle of life sciences and healthcare companies, building teams and company culture just from the start with intentionality is pretty much everything when we talk about team risk versus biological risk, right? But given venBio's investment for the long term, helping to scale companies just from the start to large scale and IPO, how do you think about supporting interdisciplinary teams and really just building long lasting company cultures at venBio, just from your experience from this creation?
Well, it's interesting. I know this may be a little bit of like a different take on it, but the one frustrating part about biotech, but I think it needs to be sort of recognized early on, is that a great team with a great plan and just a great culture cannot overcome when biology fails you. And a lot of investors, myself included, have dealt with that pain where we've had phenomenal CEO, did everything right, everything was prepped for success, and the drug failed and the company goes to zero. And so why I think it's important to flag that is, while I do think that developing sort of a lot of functions within a company early on is helpful, and certainly a culture of like transparency and honesty and just driving towards like innovation and failing fast and adaptability is important in drug discovery early on. You don't want to put the cart before the horse of like thinking sort of super holistically about a company, and I can explain more about this, before the biology's panned out. And so sometimes we'll get CEOs, particularly first-time CEOs that have came from big organizations, where they kind of land on the spot and they're like, this is what I want to do with this company. Like, we're going to instill a culture of this, and I'm going to hire a head of HR, and I'm going to hire this and these interdisciplinary. And you kind of, in my head, I'm like, first we need a binder, like we need a drug candidate. And so sometimes I think actually the initial culture you're referring to is all about like drug discovery and innovation and adaptability quickly early on. And then those other interdisciplinary functions come when like you have something, because you can't cheat biology, as frustrating as it is. And so you have nothing unless you have the biology, unlike other industries where you can adapt and change the business model and things like that.
Oh my gosh, completely. It's definitely an important call, and especially just in biospace, just how it differs from other groups and other funds. And so it's certainly an important vein. I just think as we're in our last few minutes here, Aaron, I'd just be curious, wrapping things up. I mean, just from the beginning of your career, with this kind of step function towards your own, I mean, you've always had a very future forward and tech enabled investment perspective, even when it comes to therapeutics in these new tech areas. But what have you been seeing from founders in terms of the next cycle of emerging tech? I mean, we'd love to hear what you're most excited by. Anything that you'd like to shout out, anything, just particular veins that you want to focus or shout out on?
Oh man, I mean, this could be an hour in itself, so it's a little bit of a little dangerous to open this can of worms. But I would say, a few different topics. I mean, kind of in the vein of what we were mentioning about radiopharmaceuticals, there's a lot of new modalities that allow us to sort of further drive efficacy with a number of diseases. I mean, the example we all know, right, as of recent memory, is Moderna, where now we have an mRNA approach that's been shown to work. No doubt we're going to see vaccines to a number of different diseases with a novel approach there. And so we're seeing a lot of new biologic modalities, nanobodies, VHH, like high affinity binders that are going to allow us to drive a lot more efficacy than sort of older monoclonal antibodies that we're all used to from the 80s, that had sort of like a 30-year heyday. So we're excited about a lot of these novel biologics. Even like broader or sort of longer term. I think regenerative medicine absolutely is going to become a profound way that we improve longevity and quality of life in folks. I mean, we're already seeing, right, in the ag food world of being able to develop, let's say, meat without, a whole cow and killing the cow, but you could actually develop a psoas muscle and then you have a filet mignon. And so in a crude sort of grotesque way, like it's similar to humans where like we're not that far off from developing a pancreas from your own cells, so that hopefully there's limited rejection of that. And, if you have anything from diabetes to pancreatitis, et cetera, like that's a very elegant treatment to be able to sort of use regenerative medicine to repair something versus systemic small molecules that dampen the immune system, things like that. And so I think by 2040, that field will continue to evolve. It's had a lot of hiccups, but we're seeing early stages of promise there. But overall, I think it's been a very sort of golden age of biotech recently. I think, like Ozempic and Wegovy get a lot of negative publicity about, just the cosmetic uses of that. But I think separating the forest from the trees, I mean, these are profoundly effective obesity drugs in America. And we clearly have an enormous obesity cardiovascular public health issue. And we're actually starting to address that with things that can be taken chronically and safely. And so I think we're going to continue to see a new wave of drugs focused on obesity, which I think it's hard to argue is one of the easiest, I shouldn't say easiest, most direct ways to improve population health in America. So that's, something we look at quite a bit, and we have an investment in that space as well.
Certainly a lot to cover, and wish we had more time to dive into the full can of worms at some point. But I mean, just as we're on the focus of future forward, just kind of looking ahead, what's coming next for venBio?
Well, we're very boring when we get asked this question because for the last 10 years, we've pretty much said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And, when we look at a clinical trial and the future success of a future clinical trial, if it's similar to the past trial, it's a lot of translatability and we'll invest. And so for us, a lot of our message to our investors and the portfolio companies is like same team, same strategy, same everything. We want to raise next year, which would be our fifth fund, 11 to 13 investments, same team, same focus. And so even though the therapeutic areas we look at and the technologies we look at and what we think is appealing to pharma and doctors change over time, how we operate and find them really doesn't.
100%. Well, no, it's a clean and simple philosophy. So love to have it, but certainly when things are working, it's not boring at all. So it's been amazing to see the growth of venBio and just the amazing work y'all done the past decade and more. And so just excited to see and follow along from the sidelines. Just again, as we're talking about just future forward kind of vision, I know we talked about excitement, but you kind of mentioned 2050. I think a lot of our questions when we're wrapping up, we project a lot about this on BIOS and our own thought leadership. But from your own personal perspective, to put you on the spot, maybe not open up another can of worms, but out of curiosity, Aaron, what's missing in the world that you kind of envision in 2030, 2040 and beyond? Do you have any calls to startups, things that you want to talk about beyond regenerative medicine, other focuses there?
Yeah, the other that we've taken a lot of fascination with, or at least me personally, and it's starting to emerge as sort of a need is hormonal health in general. And so, where I think there's been a spotlight recently, finally, and it's great to see, is on women's health. Women's health as a bucket has sort of been ignored. And a lot of that just has to do with hormonal changes that happen and the sequelae associated with that. Interestingly, while it may not sort of lead to direct disease in men in a straightforward fashion, a lot of like our morbidity and quality of life has to do with hormonal changes and homeostasis. And going back to how we started, I mentioned I'm very sort of interested in evolutionary biology. A lot of the selective pressures that allow us to be smart, capable human beings get eliminated after childbearing years. And so that's kind of why we fall off a cliff. And so we obviously have the capability with pharmaceutical approaches and products to change these things. But I think one of those is hormones and hormone balances in the body change dramatically because there's no selective pressure. And I think the function of both men and women and how long you live and vitality, et cetera, energy levels can change quite a bit by doing a deep dive on evidence-based medicine of hormone levels. And so I actually think that that's going to hopefully be in the spotlight more because a lot of the homeostasis in general in the body is driven by the hormonal axis, unsurprisingly. And so it's something that we're starting to see the outskirts of medicine address in like functional medicine doctors and folks like that, where many of them are very sophisticated, but they're typically not at top tier institutions with huge studies behind them. And so that's something that I hope changes.
I'm in the same exact vein as well. And I have had the same rabbit hole deep dives within evolutionary biology and just within my own education, evolutionary medicine. So excited on the similar veins, especially within women's health. So thank you again, Aaron, for the time just diving in. Just love to see what you're excited by. And, we've approached venBio's to date, your own background, your own personal experience. I love to just take a step back a moment before we close out these episodes, usually just you as a person, you personally, how do you like to spend your free time outside of bio?
Well, I have two young girls, so that takes a lot of time these days. But hobby wise, we live in Pacifica, a little beach town south of San Francisco. So I'm a pretty big surfer. Have the luxury of being able to bike to the beach and surf, but also we're a big hiking family down here. So pretty much spending time outdoors when we're not reading medical journals and building biotech companies.
Certainly. I don't know, as a Southern California native, I've been looking for some good spots up here. So if you ever have any recommendations on spot, always looking for
plenty. Just come down to Pacifica and I'll host you.
No, that's fantastic. Well, Aaron, as we're closing up here, any closing thoughts, just shameless plugs to finish up our episode here? It's been wonderful having you.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate joining. And I would say shameless plug wise, I think we talked a lot about venBio strategy and, kind of personal journey. But, one thing we're very proud of at venBio is in a relatively short history of the firm, we now have 5 approved drugs for 7 diseases. A few of them, like that of companies I've been involved with, are here the molecular structures, which is something we like to keep top of mind because for a few reasons. I think obviously as clinician scientists, it's something we're very proud of that what we're working on, patients in the US with severe illnesses are getting those drugs today, and it profoundly changes their lives. And so it's a privilege we're able to do that, and it's very gratifying and fulfilling for us to have done that. But in addition to that, from a business lens, in the US, if you are building companies that get drugs approved for meaningful illnesses, you're rewarded for that. And so it reminds us that the business model is fundamental for us. If we're getting these drugs approved, they're big outcomes for venBio. It's not, just sort of value exchange of we built a company, we sold it to another shareholder, they bought it, the company tanked, and we made some value. This is sort of long-lasting product-focused value, and so it keeps us sort of focused that we're doing the right thing by our LPs as well. So it's a totally shameless plug on our drug approvals and how that motivates us.
Total amazing plug. Well, just thank you again so much, Aaron, for your time. We're really grateful for it and just for a fantastic episode to close it out here. Can't think of a better way to close it. But just thank once again, Aaron. It was amazing having you.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. Really appreciate it.